Thank you again for joining. Hello to everyone, and welcome to our program on leadership with Mitsuru Claire Chino. Good evening to those joining in the US, and Ohio gozaimasu to our friends in Japan. My name is Paul Pass, and I'm the Executive Director of the Japan-America Society of Dallas-Fort Worth, which is co-presenting this event with Japan Society. We are excited to share that we have had over 160 people register for this program from across the world. Special thanks to Kazuo Kato and the entire Japan Society team for their hard work on this event. Before we proceed, I would like to share that we have all been affected by COVID-19, and we wish everyone safety and health during this uncertain time. In our current global situation, it is essential that we continue to communicate across borders and cultures, as well as within our own communities. The Japan-America Society of Dallas-Fort Worth, Japan Society, and the entire Japan-America Society's network adds to this communication through its programs and membership. Fall 2020 programs, should have a slide coming up in just a moment. Wonderful. Fall 2020 programs at the Japan-America Society of Dallas-Fort Worth are being supported by the sponsors that you see on the screen. Our top-level sponsors include Toyota, 7-Eleven, American Airlines, ITOCHU North America, Mizuho, MUFG, NEC, SMBC, the Japan Foundation Center for Global Partnership, Gulf States Toyota, Haynes & Boone, the Irving Economic Development Partnership, Jackson Walker, Mitsui Bussan Logistics, and the City of Plano. Lastly, I wanted to go over some suggestions to maximize your experience. If there are any technical issues, such as you are unable to hear the presenters, then please use the chat function. If you have questions during the event, please use the Q&A function on the bottom of your screen. We encourage you to ask questions early, since we may not be able to address all of them during the event. We also appreciate if you can share your first name or given name, as well as where you are from within your location within your question, just so we can see where everyone is coming from. Please note that this webinar will be recorded, and we plan to upload to YouTube later this month. Now I would like to welcome Joshua Walker, President and CEO of Japan Society, to give remarks.
Well, thank you, Paul. Konbanwa to everyone in the States, Ohio to all those in Japan. I can't tell you how excited I am to be talking with you all today on behalf of Japan Society and our great board member that we're going to be featured very quickly. Just like Paul, I want to add my heartfelt feelings to all those that are being affected by COVID around the world, but also the importance that Japanese companies are playing in this fight against COVID, not just in Japan, but here in the United States. We'll probably hear a little bit about that, about what ITOCHU and Toyota are doing tonight. But I also want to thank our business and policy sponsors, two of which you already saw on the list, Mizuho and Toyota, but also our global sponsors at Citi and Deloitte. So without further ado, let me turn this over to have a great conversation with Claire Chino. I do have to say, on a personal note, I have really been gratified to work with her as a board member who we are extremely proud of, who's path-breaking in every way you can imagine. When COVID-19 made this city the epicenter of this global pandemic, there was no one that I looked to further for leadership than Claire Chino. And so I'm excited to hear about her own personal journey and to learn more about what resiliency really looks like in the face of some of the largest challenges the world's ever seen. With that, let me turn it back to my good friend Paul Pass and all of our friends at the Japan American Society of Dallas-Fort Worth. We're excited to be partnering and kind of living out that Kizuna bond together as we move towards the new century of U.S.-Japan relations. Back to you, Paul.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Joshua. All of us around the world appreciate your leadership and your guidance. I would now like to introduce our moderator, Karen Ideno, who is Group Vice President at Toyota. She oversees the company's private label financial services business. And in this capacity, she serves as Group Vice President and CMO for sales, product, and marketing for Mazda Financial Services. She was also recently recognized by the Dallas Asian Chamber of Commerce for her leadership in diversity and inclusion. She is a national trustee of the Boys and Girls Clubs of America, and she is also an executive sponsor of the North American Advisory Council for Women Influencing and Impacting Toyota. And she has served as executive sponsor of Toyota Asian American Society in Alliance. Karen, please feel free to begin the program.
Thank you, Paul, for that kind introduction. Before I introduce our esteemed guests, I wanted to thank the Japan American Society of Dallas and Fort Worth and New York. And on behalf of Toyota, we're so proud of the strong partnership and collaboration. So I want to give you some backdrop. When Julie Iwata asked me, who serves as a board member of the Japan American Society, DFW, she's a Toyota colleague and a friend. And she asked if I could moderate the conversation with Claire Chino, and I was absolutely thrilled. What an extraordinary opportunity to meet Claire and gain insights on her leadership and vision. So this evening, it is truly an honor and a privilege to introduce Claire Chino. Claire is the president and CEO of ITOCHU International, the North American flagship of ITOCHU Corporation, a leading trading company. She is also the managing executive officer of ITOCHU Corporation. She is notably the first female executive officer of any major Japanese trading company, as well as the youngest. Claire is the executive vice president, was the executive vice president and chief administration officer of ITOCHU International, and president and CEO of ITOCHU Canada. Prior to that, she served as general counsel of ITOCHU Corporation in Tokyo. Claire joined the Fortune Global 500 company in 2000 and has been a champion for women causes. Among her many achievements, she has helped to start a corporate diversity program within ITOCHU. Claire has been widely honored for her work. The World Economic Forum named her a young global leader. Yale University named her a Yale World Fellow. And she has received awards from the Asia Society and the US-Japan Leadership Program. In 2018, she received the 8th annual Warren M. Christopher International Lawyer of the Year Award from the California Lawyers Association. She earned her JD degree at Cornell Law School, where she serves on the advisory board. So please join me in a warm welcome to Claire Chino.
Karen, thank you so much for that kind introduction. It's wonderful to be having this conversation with you. Also, my thanks go to the Japan American Society of Dallas Fort Worth, and of course, the Japan Society. So those of you who may not know what a sogo shosha does, I actually didn't know what sogo shoshas did either. The sogo shosha term is translated into trading company, but we not only trade, we also invest in things as well. So maybe if I could introduce what ITOCHU does in North America by way of a map. So this is ITOCHU International Inc. And by the way, I am joining from ITOCHU International's headquarters here in New York. This is the virtual background of our New York office. What is actually quite remarkable is that ITOCHU International opened its New York office in 1918. That's 102 years ago. But not only that, it was of course, during World War I, and many of you may know that it was during the Spanish flu. And I just find it very interesting that today we're experiencing COVID-19, 102 years later. I'm actually very proud of those who were part of the ITOCHU International Office 102 years ago, because they must have been resilient in getting through the Spanish flu. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here today. So we're very proud to be an American company with our over a century standing here in North America. Today, we operate in 48 states. We have close to 50 group companies all around North America, and on a consolidated basis, 17,000 employees. But probably most importantly, let's look to Texas. So we do have a presence in Texas, the beautiful state of Texas, the Lone Star as well. And probably the biggest presence that we have in this state is Master Halco that you see on the right-hand side, on the lower right-hand side. It is in the business of chain link fence. I had no idea that chain link fences sell so well, but it's doing very well. It's a North American leading manufacturer and wholesale distributor of chain link fences. Since this is the Japan America Society of Dallas Fort Worth sponsored event, I'd like to also mention that we do have a building in construction in Dallas, together with Daiwa House in the Arts District, in the Atelier building complex. I also wanted to mention, of course, New York, where Japan Society's headquarters is. As I said, we are headquartered in New York. And in addition to that, we have a couple of group companies. Maybe the name that is most familiar to you may be Lesport Sack, the bag manufacturer. You may have seen that brand, as well as NACE, the North American Energy Services. That's in the business of maintaining and operating power plants. And in fact, it's the largest company that maintains and operates power plants at over 100 locations throughout the United States. So that's what we do in North America, and we're very proud to be here.
Thank you, Claire. So before we get started, I'd like to encourage the audience and members in the audience, please feel free to pose your questions to Claire through the chat feature. We'll take those questions just a little bit later in our conversation. So again, please pose your questions in the chat feature. So Claire, let's get started. In 2018, you became the president and CEO of ITOCHU International. It was also a significant milestone as ITOCHU was celebrating its 100th anniversary. Can you give us a sense of what that journey was like and how you felt during that time with your current role?
Of course, I was very excited to be celebrating the 100th anniversary of ITOCHU International. One of the anecdotes about 1918 is that the Woolworth building, which is still here in New York, was recently opened, and ITOCHU became a tenant in the Woolworth building. And you may know that the Woolworth building was the tallest building in the world at that time. So to be thinking about those of our former colleagues who came from Japan all the way to New York to find a space in the tallest building in the world was something quite exciting. But another thing was that, and Karen, I don't know if you know that President Wilson turned on the lights for the Woolworth building from Washington, D.C. And up until that time, it was also all, gas lit. So electricity was something very new. It was the disruptive technology back then. And I just found that to be fascinating because, in these last several years, we have been talking about disruptive technology. But to think that over 100 years ago, electricity was the disruptive technology, something quite eye-opening to think about.
Eye-opening. And we have come so far, right, to your point about disruptors as we compare them today differently, right, in technology and electricity. So through your journey, Claire, can you share with us some of the leadership attributes that served you well along that way to help you become successful? And perhaps you can also share some of your lessons learned and what challenges that you had to overcome, and you've created new opportunities out of those challenges.
So of course, for today's purposes, the Lone Star and the Big Apple are the two most important states, but Karen, you and I have one commonality, which is that we actually grew up in California.
That's right.
So I moved to California at the age of 14 from Japan. And this was 1980, when there was an economic war going on between the US and Japan, which is kind of hard to think about today. And to actually start high school in 1980 in Southern California was definitely a game changer for me. I had gone to a very strict school, girls' school, a Catholic girls' school in Japan, where everything was prescribed, uniforms, you know, what you had to do in terms of the skirt length, your hairstyle, everything. And to come from that to a Southern California public school, where the only dress code was that you had to wear shoes to school, was really quite eye-opening. So I must say that that changed everything for me. And to be accepted in Southern California too at this public high school, where I attended ESL classes, so it's the California taxpayers who helped me along with my education. So definitely I think that was a monumental experience for me. And that experience actually led me to my career choice. So as I mentioned, there was the US-Japan economic war going, a lot of Japanese manufacturers being involved in lawsuits. And I also, you know, having seen that, wanted to be part of that scene, wanted to represent Japanese companies in courthouses. So that's how I ended up becoming a lawyer first, hoping to bridge the gap between Japanese companies and American companies, or Japan and the US. And eventually I ended up being an employee in a Japanese company.
That is great that earlier on, so early, did you already see the opportunities and the gaps that existed and what you wanted to do to help close those gaps and how you did that. That is truly tremendous. So, and thank you for doing that and taking that leap and that risk to help.
Well, it's not that I'm by myself. You know, I looked at the mission statements of the Japan-American Society of Dallas-Fort Worth, as well as the Japan Society, and both organizations have as their mission statement the mutual understanding and ongoing engagement between Japanese and Americans. And I think that is so important. And I was lucky enough to be exposed to that kind of culture.
Yes. We both work for wonderful organizations who have our roots deeply embedded in Japan. And so we both know and understand how it is to work for a North America organization that also is a global brand and that has a bigger and greater purpose. So
absolutely,
truly fortunate for both of us to work at such great and fantastic organizations. So Claire, to your point earlier around that female perspective, correct? Like being a female president and CEO in 2020. I don't think it's a balance necessarily. People always say, what's the balance of your professional work and personal life? But on a personal note, I know that you also, I understand you're a classical soprano singer, and you have other ties to your community and you do so many things. So can you share with us why and how you try to balance the perspective of work and how that works in your personal life?
Well, Karen, I'm sure it's the same with you, but there is really no switch on, switch off. You don't come to work and all of a sudden switch off everything personal. Mm-hmm. And the same thing, when you are, you know, spending private time, somewhere in the back of your mind, you're thinking about work. So your work switch is never off either. So I'm not sure if balancing life and work or work and life, that is the right term, because both of these actually coexist and are a very important part of me. And I'm sure for many people. It's more like, I like to think of it as this dimming light. So sometimes during work, of course, the private part is in the background. So your private life is sort of, you know, dimmed down, but it's never off. And vice versa. When you're spending private time, the work light is never off. It may be dimmed, but it's never off. I believe that because these two things are so important in, at least in my life, it's very important to be appreciating both of them and they're never disconnected. So I don't know about you, but during COVID, I've been hooked on many television programs and other things. One of the things that they seem to be repeating consistently here, at least in New York, is Family Feud. So I've been watching Family Feud quite a bit. And the other day they said, one of the questions was, when do you start shopping for Christmas or for the holidays, the December holidays? And the number one answer was October, which I thought was very interesting because, of course, it's a quiz program, but I think it says something about the American consumers. And you learn about consumer sentiment, how the consumer spending is affecting the US economy. And you learn all of that from financial institutions and consultants and advisors. But I think, how the Americans act, respond to something, those are things that you can learn from something like Family Feud as well. And I'm not saying that I learned everything from Family Feud, but I'm just saying that there's really no break, that you can learn from so many different things.
I agree, Claire,
as to what's going on.
I agree with you. Right. You can take something and pivot it, and the opportunity we have, because many of us are working in our homes and working remotely from the office, it does give you an opportunity to take some time to do some reflection and still learn, to your point about a game show, but yet it creates energy and it inspires you because it helps you to think about different things, not necessarily always the way we look at things in the office day to day. So I truly admire that and share that. If anyone is interested, there is another show I learned of. It's on Netflix. It's called Feed Phil. And for those of you that love to travel and around the world and also do a little cooking, he was the producer of a great show. And so he goes around and he does these far away locations, and he talks about the culture and the food. And he did Everybody Loves Raymond. That was the show that he produced. And so it's very entertaining, but it's got a great perspective on travel and food and things that right now we all might be feeling a little disconnected from, and people. So I'd encourage you as well. It's called Somebody Feed Phil. That's on Netflix. And Claire and I are not by any means being paid by anyone on these networks.
That's true. That is true.
Yeah, no. But
I should mention that disclaimer.
Yeah, no, I'm kidding. But it's fun to do some things differently and just kind of think about things from a different perspective. So the question that we wanted to ask you as well, Claire, that I thought about was, right now there's a lot going on in the new dynamics in social issues, right, with social injustice and amongst other critically important things. And they're greatly influencing the corporate world. So what I'd like to hear from you is, what does diversity and inclusion mean to you? And how does that affect how you and your team lead at the senior executive C-suite level?
So this morning there was a great webinar put on by the Japan Society on ESG. And of course, the S of ESG stands for social, and how there's so much discussion going on about the human capital, the importance of just stakeholder capitalism. In my view, yes, ESG is something that has just popped up quite recently. But I think many Japanese companies actually had this philosophy from a long time ago. So in our case, ITOCHU, which started in a place called Omi in Japan. Omi is sort of like a belly button of Japan. It's sort of in the middle of Japan. And ITOCHU was started by an Omi merchant. And what these Omi merchants would do is, because Omi is sort of the belly button of Japan, they would take things from Omi to other parts in Japan, and then they would bring back those things from other parts in Japan. And on the way, they may build schools or bridges or roads. And the philosophy that these Omi merchants really considered to be very important is a concept of a sampo yoshi. Sampo yoshi means good on three sides. good for the seller, good for the buyer, and good for society. And so you have to have this all-rounded vision. Our employees, our colleagues are a very important part of this good for the seller because we are selling things. And we have to take care of our employees. So I think what I'd like to say is that, yes, social is becoming something that is of a hot topic. But I think for many companies, and I'm sure including Toyota too, it is something that we always felt was very important and that we paid attention to.
Yes,
Having said that, it is true that the notion of social is definitely becoming deeper with the Black Lives Matter movement, the Juneteenth here in the United States. I think we companies need to make sure that people feel very safe in speaking up their views, their opinions, and to actually include them in the conversation. And so from that perspective, I think diversity and inclusion as a new sort of element to this social movement. And
I know that ITOCHU shares in this same focus, especially with Toyota, is our Toyota Way and our great pillar around respect for people. And when it's in your core and your core DNA of a company, we can do more and we know we need to do more. But the fact is we understand, we really truly believe in it, and we want to engage team members around the conversation so we can help lift up and do an even better job. So I really recognize that from ITOCHU as well. So thank you for doing that and providing your perspectives. I think what, as well, Claire, in this area, a lot of folks do think about the diversity of thought and inclusiveness into a company. And while we talk about gender, ethnicity, we also need to think about folks and how they think differently and what that does for our company. Do you specifically focus on a specific area as it relates to diversity and inclusion in the environment that you want your leadership team to embrace?
So I mentioned that I came to the United States when I was 14. And I believe it was the first week at this public high school. I saw students eating pizza and muffin in the classroom situation, which was just something that I was not expecting. At this very strict Catholic school that I went to in Japan, we actually had to cancel all of our classes and go into homeroom hour when one of the sisters found a candy wrapping paper in the hallway because we were not allowed to eat anything. And so we had to, repent and think about how bad that was, and had a huge discussion. And to come from that environment to this, pizza eating, muffin eating situation. And the teacher actually said, please do not eat in class. And the student who was eating this food said, why? So that to me was a shock that the student would actually question, which seemed to be a pretty obvious rule. And then secondly, for the teacher to respond that it's because, we don't want to leave crumbs on the floor for rats. So the teacher wasn't incensed. He actually responded to this question. I think something like that teaches you to think outside the box. So just because the rule is there doesn't mean that you have to follow. You should be questioning why the rule is there. The rule may be a very legitimately good one or something that needs to be changed. But I think very early on at the age of 14, this public high school experience taught me that. And I think that relates to my experience being a female executive in a Japanese company setting or in any setting. Before I joined ITOCHU, I was with a law firm, an American law firm, and the partnership female ratio was very low as well. So I think, of course, you identify yourself as a woman, you're a woman, but how do you make sure that you're not boxed into that identity, or that you actually do not box yourself into that identity, or any sort of prejudices or thoughts that you may have? And to really think about that is something that I think will help you be more careful in ensuring that there is diversity of thoughts within the organization, within the group, so that we could actually achieve something better.
So insightful. Thank you, Claire. Let's continue that journey of thought or that perspective. How do you inspire young women who wish to achieve leadership roles in the future, being a senior executive, a president and CEO, female president and CEO? And also, I'd like to get a perspective on mentorship, right? Because we understand whether it's mentorship, potentially sponsorship, plays a critical role in development for exposure and experience. And how might it differ from Japan and the US, here in the US? I'd love to get your perspective on that.
So whether it's a man or woman, well, first of all, I like to be noticed. I like to be acknowledged. I think it's just human nature. So I try to do that to others too. If I see something that is worthy of praise, I'm actually not very shy about praising that person, whether a man or woman. One time, a male colleague or male colleague of mine, a Japanese male colleague of mine, told me that he had never been praised. It's sort of very unique in a Japanese company setting in Japan. I think many people are not necessarily told how good a job that they're doing. But I believe that you have to actually say that. You have to acknowledge and notice people. So being noticed, being acknowledged is something that inspires me. And I'm trying to do the same thing by praising and noticing others. But Karen, I know that Toyota has this Toyota Women Influencing and Impacting Toyota. Can you tell me a little bit more about that organization? It sounds fantastic.
I sure can. It is one of our many business partnering groups. In some companies, we call them the employee ERGs. It is a group of women across our organization. We've got 18 chapters across North America, right? So we have a chapter in our plants. We have a chapter here locally in Texas at our headquartered office. There are 18 chapters, and I'm proud to help provide some guidance to those 18 chapters as the executive sponsor for the advisory council. But what it really focuses on is truly providing business objectives through the workforce, workplace, and the community, and the fact that there are over 3,000 women in our business partner group within WIT, which again is Women Influencing Impacting Toyota. And what we're trying to do is elevate and understand how can we help close that gap from a diversity and inclusion in the females within the organization, helping them to lift up earlier in their careers and help them to get exposure, help them to be able to be recognized, to your point earlier, in programs or specific programs that are meant to help develop and provide them exposure and experience across Toyota. And so I'm very proud of what they've been able to do and help to really drive the conversation. Sometimes it can be uncomfortable for some folks as we're getting focused on allyship as well, but it is different for our organization in the sales area. As an example, we are really focused on developing female leaders in our sales organization that directly deal with and partner with our dealerships and dealers. And there are opportunities for encouraging, STEM through the engineers and our plants. And we're working in partnership with organizations like the Boys and Girls Clubs, as an example. It really warms my heart when we can focus on workforce readiness, helping to lift those young youth out of the Boys and Girls Club, giving them opportunities within Toyota. And the WIT organizations, the WIT chapters have really focused on helping to bring in new and inspiring young adults into our organization and helping to drive further engagement and workforce readiness. So that's just one example of the many things they do for each other. And I'm just so proud to be part of them and help guide where I can and pay it forward to help others.
That's wonderful. I think what you mentioned also is that it's important for women to be mentors, right?
Yes.
I think women are used to being mentees. They want to be mentored, but women can also mentor others. And I think it's that self-awareness that is so important.
It is.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Claire. So another specific focus, as you can see, I am working from my workplace at home, is how is ITOCHU International addressing COVID from a business perspective, and how has your leadership team come together, and how are you helping to provide that vision for your organization?
So ITOCHU International Inc. here in New York, since March, went work from home. And we are slowly returning to the office since the end of June. Many of our group companies that I showed you on the map, they are essential businesses, and they have been working throughout COVID-19. So I'm especially grateful to the employees who have been working actually at these factories, facilities, for showing up to work every day. At ITOCHU International Inc., we actually started 2 projects as soon as COVID-19 hit. And one is called Team Journey. And that is actually the purpose of Team Journey or Project Team Journey is to think about how we can stay as one team, despite the fact that some of us may be working from home, others may be able to come into the office. We just need to make sure that we have to stay as one team. And going back to this, the importance of human capital, behind the numbers are always human beings and our very important colleagues. So it's really our colleagues first. So that's one thing. The other thing is a project called Project LEAP, L-E-A-P. I'm sure Toyota has been working on digitization, digitalization, so much more, but it was actually quite a challenge for us to go paperless before COVID-19. But now that many of us are working from home with no access to printers, we wanted to really take this opportunity to work on going paperless. So LEAP, of course, means to go into the future. It also happens that this year is a leap year. So it's called Project LEAP, and surprisingly, I haven't printed anything since March. And I think many of my colleagues haven't printed anything either. So we're definitely moving into this paperless world. So I'm of course, COVID-19 is so tragic, but I think good things also came out in making us rethink about the way that we work. It's not really about where you work from. It's really about performance, your well-being. It's all about being sort of empowered, to think individually empowered, to think about what is your best way of working. And
I would agree as well with you, Claire, so much on that. It's first and foremost the safety of all of our team members and employees. And I think, we at Toyota as well quickly realized resiliency, right, was part of it as well. The fact that our team members could work remotely and still deliver on the business objectives. Something at Toyota I think all of you are aware of, hopefully, is Kaizen, right? The theme around Kaizen is to continuously improve. And to your point about digitization and paper suppression is also around process improvements. And we learned, how to do things differently. And we've shared that, right? How quickly we could focus on new ways of doing business, right? And another simple example is where Mark Templin, who is our president and CEO as well, challenged us as an organization to say, there's a lot of meetings going on, and being virtual, sometimes there's a tendency to have more meetings. So let's be thoughtful to each other. Let's ensure we have a clear objective of why we're getting together, and ensure that we might even give time back. Instead of a 30-minute meeting, make it 25 minutes. Instead of a 60-minute meeting, make it 50 minutes, right? So people can go place to place or take a break to get their mental mindness back after a meeting. So I really, even though, to your point, it is a tragic situation with COVID and all those that it has impacted, but there is always something there that we feel that we can garner to learn from and pivot. So I'm so proud of your organization and Toyota as well as what they've done and continue to do.
So Karen, to your point about giving
Yeah.
time back, I completely agree with that. We are going to be having a virtual retreat at ITOCHU International Inc. because I'm sure you are like me. You probably have Zoom meetings throughout the day. Really no quiet time to yourself. But and actually, quiet time is something that we had pre-COVID, which may have been during the commute.
Right.
So in the morning, just sitting on the train, thinking about the day ahead of you, or going home, thinking about the day that you had.
Correct.
Right. So that was sort of the quiet time to get ready for work, or to just get into this evening mode, quiet mode. And since we don't have that, I wanted to give our employees this virtual retreat where people could sit quietly by themselves, answering some of the questions that we would be giving them. Actually, around performance.
Yeah.
What's the best way for you to perform? And then to come on virtually and to have a Zoom conversation with their colleagues. But this giving quiet time to the colleagues is such an important thing.
Would agree. And I think in those instances, you can focus on innovation as well, right? I know that is a very big focus for your organization as well as ours, to continue to innovate and create new business opportunities or ways of doing business. I know that for 2020, there's a brand new deal, 2020, and ITOCHU and your infinite mission and focus on innovation. You did mention, and before I take us to the transition to the audience Q&A, the framework around, you mentioned to me an 8th company, and I think the audience would really appreciate your insights on the 8th company.
So we have 7 business lines. Things like textile, machinery, energy and chemicals, metals, ICT, general products. So there are 7 business lines, and food. So they can be vertical silos sometimes. But when you were to think about from the consumer perspective, it's not necessarily housed in any of these vertical silos, right? So how do you actually deliver something that is needed by our consumers, customers? And in order to do that, you have to have what we call a demand perspective, market in perspective, rather than a supply perspective of wanting to sell whatever you're harvesting or making. And in order to come up with a solution, we actually created this 8th company, which is a horizontal organization where people from the other 7 businesses would actually come together, think about cross-sectoral opportunities. 8, by the way, is sort of the sign for infinity, which is probably not the right brand that I should be mentioning here, but but also the 8th element is oxygen. So we thought that the 8th company naming of it was just great as well.
So interesting and so creative and innovative. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So let's take a few. Are you open for a few questions from our audience? I have one question. There's a lot of questions that came in, so let me share the first. As a Japanese woman leading a Japanese company in America with American employees amongst Japanese expats, what is or was the one biggest employee management issue you had to deal with, and what was your solution?
So I think, communication is something that is so important. And when I say communication, it's not just the language. So it's not, Japanese or English. It's how you communicate, how often you communicate. And just, going back to my prior example, recognizing your employees, giving feedback, right? That is something I think inherently we're not necessarily very strong in the Japanese cultural setting or corporate cultural setting. And so it's not a language issue, but it's more of just the way things are. And I think that communication becomes even more of a challenge when these conversations are happening through Zoom during COVID-19. So one of the things that we actually decided to have was a communications guideline. Communications guideline for the supervisors, but also for those who are being supervised. It's really a two-way thing. So we're telling the Japanese bosses to effectively communicate and what that might look like. And also from the team members' perspective, rather than waiting for, let's say, your Japanese boss to reach out to you, what you, as a subordinate, could be doing proactively to engage in conversation, in communication. So it's really a two-way thing.
It really is. Such insight, such insight. Thank you. We have another question from Kazuo in Washington, D.C. So, Claire, what is the significance of the Warren Buffett, Berkshire Hathaway's $6 billion investment in Japanese trading house? What does this decision reflect about the potential of Japanese corporations?
So it's really exciting, I think for two reasons at least. So personally, I believe that it's a fantastic thing that Berkshire Hathaway is investing in Japan. And hopefully this is a reflection that many of the policies that were implemented under Prime Minister Abe are really changing Japan, such as the corporate governance code, more transparency, and so that's very exciting. Secondly, I believe, as I mentioned, sogo shosha is not necessarily an easy business model to understand for many Americans. It is often translated as trading companies, but when I say that, we are a trading company, people ask me, oh, so what do you trade in? Of course, we trade in things, but we also invest. I think the Wall Street term is probably diversified industrials. But the fact that, Berkshire Hathaway looked to the sogo shosha model as worthy of investing in, that is also another exciting thing.
So exciting. You must be so proud of your organization to be considered for such a great opportunity by a very influential gentleman such as Warren Buffett and the Berkshire organization. Another question for you. It says, Ms. Chino, what is your favorite life-inspiring saying or phrases that would describe your life, personal or professional philosophy? Perhaps one in Japanese or English?
Oh, good. Also, I have I don't know if you can see this, probably maybe not. No, you cannot see it. It says ichigo ichie. Ichigo ichie means it talks about the importance of meeting people and how in my life I can certainly think back on all these people who helped me out. You were kind enough to read off the awards that I have received, but it's really because my mentors, my sponsors were rooting for me. So I think it's now my turn to be supporting others, especially the younger generation.
That's so amazing of you, and thank you, and so inspiring. So here's another question from the audience. They have some wonderful and great questions here. You can tell they're really engaged in thinking about it. It's a great point to challenge why things are the way they are. What's an example of a rule you question in your leadership role?
Well, I think very simply, I think before COVID, when we had, let's say, conference calls at night, evening conference calls. Many people actually stayed in the office, although there was really no point in staying in the office. So let's say that at ITOCHU Corporation, we would be having, let's say, a conference call with somebody in the US. Those at ITOCHU Corporation would be staying in the office, engaging in the conference call from the office. But as I said, it's not so important to think about where you are taking the call from. You can certainly engage in this conference call from home. So it's something as simple as that. Just questioning the way things are done or things were done. Going back to COVID-19, I think COVID-19 made us aware of many of these issues, because now I think nobody's coming into the office just to take a phone call. Mm-hmm. I think we're all aware of the fact that we can engage in Zoom conversations from home. So,
thank you for that. Let's see. Here's another question. How was being an Asian American woman impacted your career, both positively and negatively? So you shared some of that. So again, how has being an Asian American woman impacted your career, both positively and negatively?
So it's interesting. I started out as a litigator when I graduated from law school. And the litigation world can be very, very, it can be very aggressive. And I had one incident where the opposing counsel was just so aggressive. And I'm not so sure whether it was because I was Asian, I am Asian, I'm a woman, I'm young, or I'm small. And by the way, I'm 5 feet tall. I don't know how tall you are, but I'm actually quite small.
5'3.5". Sometimes they say 5'4".
So, or maybe it was none of them, right? Maybe it was just because I was a litigator, he was a litigator. Mm-hmm. And by the way, this guy was, he was probably over 6'3", Caucasian, male, very seasoned. Mm. And I guess my point is that you don't want to necessarily think about the reason why you're treated in a certain way. You don't want to dissect that too much. Mm-hmm. Because maybe, again, you're boxing yourself in. Having said that, I think there are certain things that are known to be sort of things that people think of women to be, like quieter. Asian women are quieter, and therefore maybe they can boss Asian women around. Some people may think that. And so I think it's important to be aware of some of these prejudices ahead of time and be ready. But I guess my most important point is that you don't want to be dissecting the reason why you're treated a certain way too much.
Agree. Sorry, I apologize. I'm just checking the ones that are coming in. Here's another question, Claire, for you. I'd be interested, this is from James Grosvenor, I would be interested in how you are able to coach Japanese executives to recognize and compliment their subordinates more often for doing good.
Well, I think, so I compliment them as well. And if they're not doing that, I actually compliment their subordinates in front of them. So I think it just becomes a culture. And of course, from an HR perspective, we have instituted things too. We have implemented these check-ins by the bosses and the subordinates, that they're having these conversations around goals that the subordinates set at the beginning of the year, and to be constantly having feedback conversations.
Ongoing conversations.
Ongoing conversations.
So critical, the candid conversation. Here's a question from Julia Wada. Have How have mentors or sponsors played a role in your personal success? Any particular lessons learned?
So I have to, of course, mention my great mentor, Jill Feldman, who's in San Francisco. She is probably the best lawyer that I ever came across. And when I met her as a young lawyer, she was a partner of a law firm, probably the best negotiator that I had ever come across. Very busy as a mother with 2 kids. And she was constantly juggling things. You know, these 2 kids were constantly fighting. She was finding solutions for them. And I think her personal life, those skills definitely translated to her skill as a good negotiator, because she was always able to come up with solutions satisfactory to both sides. So it's not about saying yes or no. It's really thinking outside the box and looking for solutions. So whether that's in the legal setting, negotiation setting, or in the company management setting, I find that to be one of the more important skills. And that's what I've learned from my mentor. I think Karen is Karen. Oh, there you are.
I am now dealing with tech issues. So here's the reality of working with technology. Goodness.
So, Claire, I think while Karen is, we're still trying to find her. Let me just share one last question. It's from Sam Shichijo. Why do you think Japan is so slow in promoting more women to executive positions like yourself? And what must happen to change that? And this will be our last question.
Thank you, Paul. So I think I'm not so sure if it's a gender thing. I mean, I think there are a lot of factors, a lot of things. For one thing, I think age is very important. So I think there's a set notion that in order to be, let's say, an executive officer, you have to be of a certain age, right? And so when I became an executive officer, and Karen was kind enough to say that at the youngest, but youngest I was 46. 46 is definitely not that young. And so many of these notions that you have to be of a certain age, you have to be of whatever, all these sort of, pre-existing customs, culture, I think that needs to be re-examined so that we can actually move to more of a performance-based recognition.
Great. Sorry about that. What would be a virtual meeting without any technology challenges? So I am human. I apologize. My Wi-Fi for a moment had a little glitch. But Claire, thank you, Paul, for stepping in and asking Claire the last part of the conversation. But Claire, I want to pause here and I want to convey my sincere appreciation and gratitude for sharing your leadership insights and engaging in our conversation. Thank you for your gift of time, because I know how precious that is, and paying it forward with your inspiring perspectives. You are truly an amazing leader. And so thank you again for your time and perspectives. I know everyone on this call would join me in thanking you if we were virtually, could talk and enjoy each other's company more. But at this point now, I'd like to hand it back over to Paul for some closing comments from the Japan American Society. So thank you again, Claire. It was an honor.
Thank you, Karen.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Claire and Karen, for this enlightening discussion. We really appreciate your time and your willingness to just share this great information with us. And we'd also like to express our gratitude to everyone who attended the program and for your eagerness to explore women's leadership and corporate affairs as it relates to the U.S.-Japan business relationship. We had a lot of amazing questions, and we apologize that we could not address all of them. Before we close, we also hope that you can join some upcoming events. And so there'll be some on your screen coming up in just a moment. Let's give them, I think there we are. So first, for Dallas-Fort Worth, please save the date on Thursday, October 29th for a celebration of our 50th anniversary with appearances by actor George Takei, former U.S. presidential cabinet member Norman Mineta, 6 former and current ambassadors, 4 former mayors, and Toyota Motor North America president and CEO Tetsuo Ogawa, among other special guests. The evening will also include a special historical video of our accomplishments since 1970, musical performances, a silent auction, and trivia about the society. Next month, as we see there on the screen, next month, in partnership with the World Affairs Council of Dallas-Fort Worth, we will host Ambassador Shinsuke Sugiyama for a discussion on Japan's ongoing response to the pandemic, the new administration under Prime Minister Suga, and how the U.S. presidential election will affect U.S.-Japan affairs. And now we can share some information about Japan Society events. On Tuesday, October 20th, as you see on the screen, there will be a timely webinar on the upcoming U.S. presidential election and implications for U.S.-Japan relations. Be sure to also check out the Nichibei Global Talks video series, the Japan Society's latest online resource featuring U.S. and Japanese perspectives on global issues. On Wednesday, October 21st, enjoy a unique live performance by sound artist Rieko Yamada, who will utilize old broken accordions to compose avant-garde scores set to vintage silent film images. Finally, on Tuesday, October 27th, attend a live art talk examining the immensely beautiful paintings from Japan's Edo period. And lastly, please check our websites, www.japansociety.org and www.jasdfw.org for more information and regular updates as we schedule events throughout the rest of 2020 and into 2021. Please also visit our YouTube channels for original content and recordings of past programs. We kindly ask that you complete the post-event survey, which will pop up in your browser once the program ends. This concludes today's program. Thank you so much for attending. Have a wonderful rest of the evening for our US attendees and a great rest of the day for those in Japan. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Claire and Karen, Joshua, everyone for joining. Thank you.